The Thor movies. Out of all of the solo franchises of Marvel films, they seem to have been the hardest to find a way to translate a fan favorite character to the big screen, right? But while the first stumbled a little bit, bringing the concept of an alien god into a world thus far populated by very aggressive militaristic human beings, the second notably fell very flat, and the third found successful footing, redefining the character as a somewhat oafish meathead in a buddy comedy, which was a lot of fun, but where the humor revitalized the third Thor film, it kneecapped the fourth, in my opinion. Thor Love and Thunder is a fun film with some significant problems that speak to the problem of farming intellectual property from yourself poorly. I'm Dan Umpton, and this is the Doomcast. Alright, first of all, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button and the bell. I make about one video a week, and honestly, they're all very good, so I'd hate for you to miss even one. Anyway, short version, Thor is one of my favorite characters in Marvel, and Jason Aaron's run, especially the Gorr the God Butcher arc, is probably my favorite individual story. So I knew I wasn't going to get a perfect adaptation, but oh boy, I had no idea what I was actually in for. I mean, I thought that we stood a pretty good chance of getting something that was close to comic accurate after the near perfect reproduction of Thalagar the Behemoth, that giant stegosaurus thing. But look, if nothing else, if you had fun, that's great. If you were a comic fan, you probably didn't love it either. Alright, spoilers follow obviously, so do me a favor and save this video and then watch it after you've actually seen the movie. Now, the first 10 minutes are a solid look into the origin of Gorr. Despite the weird but pretty understandable choice to not make him look like Dreadlock Voldemort, the origin was really close to the comics, save for him finding his own sun god still alive and then slaying him with a necrosword, which was a reasonably good change. The next 10 minutes are utterly freaking ridiculous. I generally despise narration in films, but it works in certain circumstances. Here, it did not. Taika's Korg narrating a deadpan revision of the character of Thor from a somber, sobered character who underwent a lot of trauma back to the jolly fuckboy and bro that he was in Ragnarok is really frustrating to me. We just undid his whole character arc. Is it funny? Yeah, it is. Did it feel like his time with the Guardians was wasted? A concept that we deserved to get to see to fruition that we didn't actually get to see happen? Mostly. Mostly it established that this film is another Taika Waititi joint that is way too much Taika Waititi humor because there was nobody apparently on board to disagree with any of his decisions. What made Thor so appealing was his arc from man-child to arrogant idiot, to a man who bore the loss of his whole culture in part from his poor choices, and then saw his remaining reconciled family, Loki, murdered by Thanos right in front of it. And that was the story of a person confronting trauma and growing and finding strength and new purpose. And I thought that was great. But for him to go back to being a buffoon is kind of annoying, just for the sake of humor. The gravity of the comic version of the Gorr story is exactly the same. It follows Thor through his time where he grows from boy to godling to avenger and then to king. What made Gorr so appealing was being a ruthless, fully hateful, malicious god killer, a fully unstoppable force with a pretty reasonable and philosophically anarchic ideal. No gods, no masters. And that he believed that the idea of gods is an affront to living beings, so he sets off to destroy all gods through all time, and then when he nearly achieves his goal, he resurrects a version of his wife and son, only to kill his wife after she calls him a god himself, at which point his son is just a shadow, and a part of that same necrosword betrays him to Thor out of total disgust. And that, in my humble opinion, was what I expected to actually happen. And the fact that we didn't get even that part of it kind of annoys me a little bit. One of the coldest and most seriously moving Thor villains, maybe one of the best Marvel villains, new Marvel villains in decades upon decades, and you just utterly wasted it. It sort of felt, you actually ripped off Demon Slayer Mugen Train for the ending instead of what you had right in front of you. Which, there's a huge beef that I have. Aaron's arc started well after the Marvel Cinematic Universe, after the first Thor film, right before the second. And clearly, the writers and artists like Jason Aaron and the artists like Esad Ribic and Russell Dauterman, they knew, as incomparable as their work is, that they were making comics that would eventually be adapted into Marvel films, 100%. And this is what you made with that, and you're not even paying them, really, for it. A sort of unrecognizable mess that instead of the philosophical journey into nihilistic or agnostic mystery, this is what we got. What was even the point of having an intellectual property farm to build new stories from if you're just going to scrap those stories, strip them down to bare bones and make something cheap and just random jokes about 90s rap and Bluetooth speakers instead of real focus on real themes? This should have been 2 movies. There could have been a Gorr the God Butcher movie and Mighty Thor film completely separate from one another. And they both could have been great. Don't get me wrong, it's not all bad. I'm just frustrated that you were deprived of the movie that you could have had based on what the source material was. Anyway, the good. Jane's turn as Thor, even after the resurrection of Mjolnir, which wasn't entirely super reasonable, or the fact that she insisted on being called the Mighty Thor. Every single scene with her in it, especially the interaction with Tessa Thompson's Valkyrie, all shined. It was great. And she got a worthy post-credits scene entering Valhalla with Heimdall. Axel Heimdall's son as a character was also a pretty great addition and a good idea, as was the scene with the Thor Corps full of kids close to the very end. That was a good idea that worked for the story that they built. Now, if you're in it for the laughs, for the most part, there's a good few, even though they try for a whole lot more. Especially in Omnipotent City, which I want to point out fanboys confidently insisted that that was Olympus, and I didn't think that it was, and I was correct. Russell Crowe was pretty damn funny as Zeus, and of course the post-credits scene of Hercules has me pretty hyped because that's one of my favorite B-list Avengers characters for sure. Even a cool cameo by Chaos Wars and Amaterasu Mikaboshi was in there. No Shadrach, the god of daffodils and documentation, the god of kittens and coconuts, the god of bombs. Nope. Another great character from Jason Aaron's run that you should have run with, but absolutely didn't. Could have been very easy, but I gotta say the addition of Love, Thor's daughter, if that's actually her name, as the Stormbreaker-wielding little girl at the end that was Gorr's daughter, I guess. It seems like it's gonna work, but I really hope that we were going to get a Beta Ray Bill appearance. And in 4 movies we haven't. Maybe 5th. Who knows? If there is one. All in all, I want to say that there's an awful lot to like, and maybe there is if you are a casual comic book fan. All in all, I want to say that there is an awful lot to like, and I'm sure that there is if you're a casual fan who just likes the movies and thinks that you're also a comic fan as a result, or some kind of geek. Now, this is at best the ultralight beer of comics, a bland, flavorless imitation of the real thing reduced to its bare essentials, but it sort of does the job if you have enough of them, right? And I can't bother shitting on you if you honestly enjoy it and had fun. And if it took you away from the nonstop existential nightmare that the world has become in the last 2 years for even 2 hours, that's great. It did its job. Sometimes movies are just supposed to do that. But there was a time that the MCU felt like a fun special ride that couldn't actually miss. And it was the party that we were all waiting for. The idea of having movies adapted from this in live action was unheard of, and it was super special. And now I guess that it took Phase 4 to make me realize that they're mostly misses. But I guess what the hell do I care? I've got a signed copy of Mighty Thor #1, and I've got a signed copy of Thor God of Thunder #1. And at the end of the day, maybe that's all these are good for, is just, you know, making a little bit of money at the expense of a good story. Thanks everybody for watching. See you next week.